Hi, my name is Mattia Murray, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Welcome back for part 2 of Deb Malkin's interview. If you want to hear the first part, you can go back, but you can also go ahead and listen to this one as it is. Thanks.
And this is why I love using science as your, I don't know how I want to say it, like as an aid. So there are a lot of studies that actually talk about that show muscle growth just by using visualization. And I'm just like, look at this cool study. What do we want to take from this study? There's beautiful work by Ellen Langer out of Stanford, is all about mindset, different things, different stories that people are told about things that they're eating or things that they're doing, and then how that changes the effect on their body. There's some cool story, study about VO2 max, which is the amount of oxygen that you're taking in. And people were told, in one group, they were told that they had a gene that allowed them to have better VO2 max than other people. And then they tested them, and in whatever sciencey kinds of ways. I'm also not a scientist, so I just get to say words like sciencey. And in this group that they told they were genetically disposed to having better VO2 max, they had better VO2 max. And that was just a lie. They didn't, that was the experiment.
Yeah.
So belief plays a really big role in what we experience. And so to me, that's the heart of the storytelling piece. It's what is it? When we feel things, what do we believe about it? What do we think that it means about us, about the future, about the present, right? Where did that story come from? How do we change both the story, but also then the actions that you're taking? What do you want to do more of, right? What do you actually want your embodied experience to be more like? And so, and that's so different and personal for each person. I am not ever going to tell people what their body experience should be. But usually people have a desire for something. And so that's, and at least I get to be a safe place for people to explore what that desire is, because sometimes it's also not kind of particularly acceptable in whatever social context or group that they're in, or they, been told well, that's not possible for you, or, you've had an issue for such a long time, you can't even imagine it being different. And I think I just am well, let's just see what happens.
Yeah. And I love that, connecting back to talking about play earlier, because I feel like let's see what happens is underneath so much play.
Yeah, it is. And I really do think I've seen enough weird stuff to know there's why, I don't know. But I want to be in that I don't know in the best way. I want to be in that, I have no idea what is possible for this to change for you. Because I've seen people, I've had clients, I've had migraines for 20 years, and then they were gone in 3 weeks. And I'm just okay. We were both shocked.
Yeah.
And then she had a baby and had no pain. And I was that's amazing. She's yeah, I just did the work. And I was that's cool. That was not a part of that was not a part of the sales pitch.
Oh my God.
That you'll have a baby without pain, right? But I was she embodied that work and she believed it, and didn't say oh, well, it's only going to work in these containers, right? She just was willing to use these tools and these practices and show up in that moment of having a child.
Wow.
With it, and then had that experience. And we were just both okay, that's amazing. Cool. Now I know that's something that can happen.
Yeah.
I have never given birth, so I have no idea.
That's how a lot of my work feels as well, is people just having these ridiculous experiences and results, and just being like, oh, all right, I guess we'll add that to the list of like what's possible. Yeah.
Yeah. I just never want to be somebody's limiting belief.
Mm. Yeah. Ooh, that's like a whole juicy topic too that I think about a lot in, mostly working with autistic and ADHD people, that I'm striking this interesting balance between, it totally makes sense that your brain is having this type of response. This is actually a very classic response for your neurotype. And it is also very possible for this to fit into your life differently, which doesn't necessarily mean that the instinct or the like neurotype tendency goes away, which is how a lot of people approach, right? Healing work is like, we just have to
Mm-hmm.
make this thing stop. And I'm like, well, that could just be a feature, not a bug. And there are very different ways, I guess, in that like embodied storytelling sense, that this can fit into your life and actually just be a part of your life, or, not a big deal, as opposed to you thinking it's the linchpin of everything that's wrong with you.
And it's that subtle perspective change, but you can't tell somebody that.
Right.
They have to experience it.
Turns out.
Because also, and like, I just never want to be the authority of somebody else's experience in that way. And this is what I love and also hate about like the internet and TikTok and like getting mental health support online is like, we're like,
In
here,
60-second chunks at a time. Yeah.
and like, here are ADHD traits, or autistic traits. And like people like find something that they connect with. And what happens in that moment is when you see yourself and that's normalized, then you're like, feel a sense of relief. You feel connection. But then it's almost like that feeling, we want more of that feeling, right? We want more connection. We want to feel normal. We want to feel seen and heard and validated. But we like make the wrong attribution. We attribute that to like the knowing these things about my traits and finding more and more and more of like, how am I like this thing on this meme? Rather than like, what I really liked about that experience was the feeling of like being seen, being told that like my neuro variation is also normal and or whatever it is, like valid.
Yeah. And connecting,
And I
right,
think
with people who are
yeah,
similar.
we want that experience of connecting, but I think sometimes it gets kind of subverted, not intentionally, but subverted into matching, like finding connection and community with how many of these things can we match?
Yeah. Well, and that's like another thing that I've noticed or am noticing about people approaching me is, they've got this big list of 20 traits in their head, and they're like, well, I'm at 18. So I don't think and I'm just like, I mean, I'm not like, this is not diagnostic, obviously, and none of these traits are necessarily diagnostic. And at the same time, in diagnosis, you don't meet all of the things either, right? There's a list, and it's like there has to be at least two from this list and two, right? Like, anyway.
Mhm.
But what I'm noticing in particular, and it's something that I experienced in my own healing journey, is if something is improving, is getting easier for someone, there can be this like almost like, oh no, I'm not going to fit into my community anymore because I no longer have this trait through which we're connecting, as opposed to it just being about you, the whole person, being in that space.
And that can be devastating. And I see this in movement. Like if somebody is very identified as a person with chronic pain, it's very hard to believe that that shifts and changes because I
Yeah.
think people, have stories that like chronic pain is permanent or like fibromyalgia. Like we have these different kind of categories in which we've identified these clusters of symptoms as diseases rather than like responses to stress or just physiologic, like learned conditioned responses of the body. And and people often find a lot of community and connection inside of containers in which we are getting support because there's not support.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of places of not support in the world. There's a lot of places of not care in healthcare, right? But then it can be very hard to want to change or let go of the pieces that are helping us feel safe and connected when it's also that kind of sense of threatening one's identity piece.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have no answers for that, but it's like I get it, and it's messy.
Yeah.
And it can be hard.
And those community spaces as well, they're often, people like us, like with multiple of the same identities, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
for example, a lot more people who were assigned female at birth end up actually developing PTSD, even if they experience the same trauma for a variety of reasons, not all of which are understood, and are also more likely to develop the long-term health problems from, you know, extended trauma. So if you're in a community space with other people with some of the same, health labels that you have, it's also quite likely that you share a lot of, they just like understand a lot of your trauma history with very little
Mm-hmm.
language. And that's really special.
It is really special. It is really important. And it's hard. It's hard to want something different or even to understand that there's parts of your experience that can change in a way that's positive. Well, even the word positive feels
Yeah,
complicated,
right.
right? Like I don't love being in this like bound by the labels, but I mean, like, who doesn't want to feel less pain? I just really want to be like, sometimes I'm always like, well, what if nothing else changes other than you feel less pain? Like, what does that change for you? And people are like, yeah, everything would change. I'm like, cool. What if we just did that? There's no like, okay, you feel less pain and then you have to go do all these things, right? Become this other person that you don't want to be. Like, now I have to run, like I have to become a runner, or I have to go do these things, right? And I think sometimes that's where people go, is like, we don't actually know what's possible when things feel different. Sometimes just leaving it to be open
Mm,
and letting it unfold,
mm.
it can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, I'm actually in a really interesting point right now. I feel like in my own development, both physically and in terms of emotional and mental capacity,
Mm-hmm.
because in general, I feel so much better than I ever have before by like so much. Like it's like not even, I can't even compare to like
Mm-hmm.
how I used to feel. I feel so much better in like every way. And for the first, I don't know, 95% of, or maybe even more of my intentional healing journey, starting in my mid teens, in the back of my mind, it had that. And then I have to do this that you were talking about. It was like, I will get better and then I will be able to fulfill my potential and use all of my gifts and like give
Mm-hmm.
stuff to the world. And there was this like huge bucket of I have to's. And then I
Yes.
have this really lovely moment of like intentionally, I guess a little over a year ago, working with a coach who really finally got me to actually slow down in some meaningful ways. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm actually allowed to just have space and just have rest for no reason, not because it's going to make me more productive later, but because I just deserve to exist and experience pleasure. And when I actually made
Mm-hmm.
that actual embodied shift, like it was both the embodied part and the like embodied storytelling. I love that term so much. Like my whole frame of looking at my life changed. And I'm in this moment right now where I'm just like, wow, I can make myself do a lot more things. And I also kind of
Mm-hmm.
don't want to. So I don't have an end goal right now. Like I'm not trying to make myself do anything in particular other than engaging in things that I enjoy and doing projects I enjoy and working with people that I think are cool. So it's really interesting because I would have said up until a year ago that like the point of this journey was to feel better so I could then make myself do more stuff. And now I'm just kind of like, yeah, hanging out. Hey, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so amazingly
Hmm.
countercultural, right? And to be able to like just hang out and exist the without that being like, well, because I can't do anything else. Sometimes it's so
Right.
powerful. I mean,
Which was true for me at certain points. Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't know if I answered your question about exercise, if that's even important to go back and answer.
If there's anything that you like want to share in the context of what we've just been talking about in general, yeah, I'd love to hear any more thoughts you have.
Yeah. Let's see. I think at the heartbeat of my work is always like change is possible. Um, and sometimes it does mean doing a physical activity in a not regimented, but in a repeated way to create some kind of embodied shift, right? To create some kind of change. But it doesn't have to be awful or boring. And it doesn't like, so I guess that's the part that I wanted to say. I think because I like lifting weights. Like there are just things that I like to do. And so I get to do them and then I feel better and I feel stronger. And so I didn't know any of that when I was young. So I feel really excited that I get to do that now in my 50s. And like, I'm excited to be that person and get to do that, for the rest of my life. Like I want to be that 100-year-old weightlifter, person who's just like kicking it on, well, whatever that social media will be when I'm 100 years old.
Beaming straight into our brains. Yeah.
Yeah, just beaming into our brains. You'll just know when I hit that deadlift PR at 100 years old. But I like doing it, but I'm also like, I'm not very competitive and I don't, so there's just like, there's so much room to make things work for you. So sometimes that is like getting the right coach, like finding the right help and being willing. There are so many smart people. There's a whole field of trauma-informed weightlifting. Like there are just so many brilliant neurodiverse people who are out there trying like, and I just want to say neurodiverse because I think like we're always like, how do we just make this shit? How do we make this thing called life work for us and maybe other people who are like us? And so I just want to say like, there's so many different ways to create different experiences in the body because the bodies are at heart dynamic. They're dynamic and responsive, and they are these like beautiful systems. And so sometimes we can create huge change just by like changing our relationship to sleep.
Oh, yeah.
And then that just changes everything. So it really like there's so many different avenues in, and I just want to encourage people to think more like pull the camera back, think about it more broadly, think about what's already working, really celebrating what's already like working well in our bodies, because I guarantee there just are, but we're not giving ourselves any credit. And then just starting there and just being like, what do I want to be different? And just letting it be light and curious and almost in resistance to all of those messages that are very like scary, doom and gloomy, and all or nothing.
Yeah. And I love what you said too about your experience of lifting weights. And it sounds like that is genuinely pleasurable to you. Like you are enjoying the experience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I love that around like all forms of movement and just even the broader, care for ourselves and care for our bodies, that it can be light and fun and pleasurable. And we can be doing the forms of them that we actually enjoy. And that is just so, so different than, well, I guess I have to do this thing because this is the thing I've seen modeled.
Mm-hmm. And there can be so many different ways to create enjoyment. So whether that's like doing it with a friend, finding the right coach, like doing it with your favorite movement, music, like start with like what feels good and also just like letting what feels good, like connecting to that feeling and letting that part feel safe. I think it can be really powerful. Sometimes people discount. What I hear a lot is people like, well, that feels good, but what I'm supposed to be doing is this other thing. And I'm like, but you're not even letting yourself enjoy what you're actually enjoying. So really just having that kind of sense of rebellious enjoyment and sinking into the pleasure of how good something feels. And then, yeah, I don't know, seeing what that grows. Clearly, I can just say the same things over and over and over again. It's the other thing I love about being a coach is like in being like this neuroplasticity coach, like part of my job is just to repeat things over and over again. And I'm like, great. That is like taking one of my most like hated traits about myself and like actually using it for good.
Yay.
I found the right job.
Yes. And for me, one of those related things is like info dumping, which obviously I love, but I love being able to just preface for somebody like, hey, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes. I'm planting some seeds. You do not need to remember what I'm saying. Like, this is just, we're just looking for what stands out to you. And then what's interesting to you will go in that direction, which I guess is also like how the podcast interview goes.
I love that because it's relational.
Mm.
That's what matters, right? It's I'm not the authority telling you what you should know or think, but I'm going to say some words and we're going to notice what lights up inside of you. And then we're going to go explore there.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much like that exact approach. And it's how I approach my own internal landscape when I'm working with things I find inside myself. It's just like, where's my attention going right now? What's interesting to me right now? Letting my interest based nervous system do its thing. And then following that interest and then just going in and like, and I mean, this is again, probably my belief as an autistic person that like the smaller you go, the more detail you go, the more interesting shit there is in the world, right? Like I can stare at just like a tiny, tiny snail forever. But like internally, I have that same process. It's like, okay, this is interesting. And then at almost any level of experience, like even these tiny, tiny experiences honed in on one little thing I found interesting in my experience, there's always like the brain and the body are always working at all these levels. And it's our focus that brings us to a point where we get something out of it. But there's just all of this levels of extrapolation always happening.
Yeah, I love that.
Cool. Well, that feels like a natural winding down point.
I think that feels great.
Yay.
I mean, I have a feeling we could have a 6-hour podcast if we wanted to, but I don't know who'll listen to it, so that's okay.
I would
stop
just
now.
break it up into episodes at that point.
Totally.
Thank you so much. This is really lovely. So my final, well, actually, I want to ask you something that I asked Sophia as well, which is just sort of like if there were things that you wish you could just like implant in people's brains that they would just like know and internalize, or just like, I wish everybody just knew this, like just listing any of those that come up for you.
So the first thing I would say, because I am a chronic pain coach, is that pain is like a biopsychosocial experience that is communication from the body, that it is not just a message of tissue damage, right? That there's, and it's not a message of tissue damage, like, right, there are processes that we can go through to explore what is going on. So that's the first thing, because I think that again speaks to which diagnostic route do we go, what therapeutic process do we go, and what do we need to know about ourselves. So that's the first place that I would start. Other things that people can know is shame is, how do I want to say this? I want to say like meeting shame is like the beginning of unraveling all the shit that like you want to be better, you have to come in contact with shame. Like shame is where you start. You don't have to stay there, but it's so rich with information. And the other part that I want people to know is like, I don't know, it's not your fault. That also just really powerfully, I want people to know that like it's not your fault, but also as an adult, like, it does become our kind of like thing that we get to solve or get to explore, but kind of like how we ended up where we are in this moment is a whole series of just different events and the ways that we've responded to them and the universe that we were, you know, brought up in and cared for or not cared for inside of. So I'll start, I think that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I know that you have such a wealth of knowledge. So I'm very happy to get some like high level points. Yeah. So final two questions. Where can people find you?
People can find me. I have my website, which is movewithdeb.com, and a podcast, which you can find on that website, or it is Move with Deb, the podcast, which eventually I'm working on a new name and some other stuff because I want to bring in some different conversations, but I don't know when that's happening. Sometime in 2023. And I'm on Instagram also, Move with Deb, and you can watch me
Be hot.
do weird things and check out my ass. And I don't know, watch my clips of NCIS that I post. But I do try to share things that I find useful in both kind of like mind body work, embodiment, pain reprocessing, kind of all like, and then like queer stuff and fat stuff. Like it all is like, those are the flavors of the things that show up on my Instagram.
Yay. And then what advice do you have for yourself at another age? Like what that age is, and then
I think the advice I have for myself in the future, because I am a caretaker of my father who's 96 years old. My advice for myself in the future is to let people care for me and just and enjoy whatever there is to be enjoyed. That's my advice. I'm going to have to remember to listen to this a few times over the years.
I love that because I phrased at another age that way. You're the first person who's actually taken it into the future. So I'm very excited that this has finally happened.
Yay!
Yay. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's so juicy for me too. Just the like letting myself be cared for, but also being able to find the pleasure in it and not just having it be, oh, I'm forcing myself to be cared for.
Yeah, it's very hard, and watching my father go through some of that, and so much of that is about socialization, right? Being the father and the provider in his family and the role, and like watch then having to lose that, and and then there's cognitive changes and all of that stuff as well. It's very challenging. So I'm watching and I'm like, okay, if I have control over things in the future, what do I want to be different? And like just being like, I really want to be delighted by the smallest thing because I want most of my day, if possible, to feel as good as it can feel, even if I'm not physically able to do much of anything.
Well, thank you so much. I loved this conversation. This is so fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. And so I am very honored to be here.
Thank you. And I'll talk to y'all next week. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamurray.com. That's MATTIA at MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.